Welcome back to Déjà-Review, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of weeks ago I posted an incredibly random half-hour video of Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, just for the hell of it, and well, it's gotten some pretty decent views and positive feedback, so it seems a worthy idea to work my way through the trilogy and give my 2 cents on each game, as people like listening to opinions. This time round, we'll be tackling the unmistakable black sheep of the pop franchise, Warrior Within. It's by far the most polarising entry in the series, with some calling it an incredible sequel that builds upon everything its predecessor brought to the table, while others say it threw everything that people loved about the Sands of Time out the window, replacing it with gratuitous violence and edginess. There seems to be no real middle ground with this one, and so I'll skip the tedious introduction stuff and get straight into my thoughts. Let's explore 2004's blood-soaked Prince of Persia: Warrior Within. The story picks up 7 years after the events of the Sands of Time, where the prince now finds himself endlessly hunted down by a colossal beast known as the Dahaka. We find out through the ramblings of an old wise man that the Dahaka is the guardian of the timeline, and so it's this thing's mission to ensure that the prince meets his death, because he idiotically opened the Sands of Time all those years ago. Pretty grim stuff, but luckily this fella's got an ace up his sleeve and tells the tale of the Island of Time, where it's said that the Empress of Time first created the sands, which the prince opened in his ad. The story gets the prince thinking, if he can journey to this fabled island and somehow stop the sands from ever being created, then he could never have opened them, and the Dahaka will have no business hunting them down anymore. It's clear from the off that Warrior Within is much more plot heavy than its predecessor, and even after multiple playthroughs, it's quite hard to get your brain wrapped around this convoluted setup. Moving on, a prince sets sail for the Island of Time, although I've absolutely no idea how he knows where this mysterious place is. Anyway, he must have been on the right track, because an evil woman in black called Shadi and her motley crew of sand monsters take over the prince's ship and attempt to kill him. After a nasty confrontation, you bitch! Shadi gets the better of the prince and knocks him well and truly the fuck out. In a convenient stroke of luck though, the wreckage of his ship washes ashore on the Island of Time and he can get on with his quest, only difference being he now has no way off the island and his whole crew are stone dead. The prince soon catches up with Shadi and, in an attempt to ruthlessly slaughter her, steps into a time portal which transports them both hundreds of years into the past. It's worth noting that the old fella at the beginning also mentioned these things too, so the prince isn't taken completely off guard here. He ends up brutally killing this woman and in turn saving a stranger called Kailina. The prince hopes that this woman can grant him an audience with the Empress, but with that currently being an impossibility, Kailina instead tells him how to open the throne room door to where she resides, and this just isn't any old door opened by a simple key. Far from it. Instead, the prince must navigate his way through another trap-ridden fortress, activating 2 complex mechanisms on opposite ends of the island. If that wasn't bad enough, along his journey he has to repeatedly use time portals to travel between the past and the present, and run for his life against the Dahaka, who eventually discovers his whereabouts on the island. There's a hell of a lot going on in this story as you merely go from point A to point B. So finally, after activating the locks, the prince returns to the throne room, only to discover that this strange, strong-willed female who oddly resides on the island is actually the Empress of Time. What a shocker. Turns out that the Empress is on a quest to change her fate, much like the prince, as she is foreseen in the timeline that he kills her. A monumental showdown occurs between them both, but as foretold, our handy prince kills her. Well, actually destroys her, as she curiously explodes into sand itself. The prince returns to the present and is ready to somehow go home, thinking all is well in the world, but the Dahaka hunts him still and forces him to reevaluate the whole situation. I'm guessing, thinking back on how the Empress burst into a cloud of sand, he comprehends that the Sands of Time must have been created from her remains, and so he still opened them in his ad, and the Dahaka still lusts for his death to restore the timeline. Our poor old prince is in a right state when he miraculously stumbles upon supernatural hieroglyphics on the wall which tell the story of the Mask of the Wraith, a sacred artefact which allows the wearer to travel back into the past and exist in the same timeline as their former self. Truly trippy stuff. Anyway, the prince sees this as his last saving grace and ends up donning the mask, becoming the Sand Wraith itself. In doing so, he gets transported back several hours to when he first arrived on the island and runs a parallel course with his other self, even bumping into him on several occasions. The prince discovers there's a hidden portal behind the Empress's throne and formulates a plan to force her through this portal into the present with himself. This way, even if he must kill her, the sands will be created 7 years after the events of the previous game, and so it wouldn't be possible for him to have released them. Now, this is where it gets a bit trickier. as there's in fact two endings to this game. In the non-canon ending, the prince kills Kylina in the present and the Dahaka arrives one final time to take the Sands of Time in the form of her body and all the relics pertaining to it, so that no fragments of the sands remain in the timeline. The prince then presumably builds a boat and sails home to see Babylon in the midst of a deadly war. In the secret but canon ending, confusingly, the prince acquires a powerful water sword and takes on the Dahaka in the final battle instead of the Empress. After the Dahaka is defeated, the prince and Kylina build a boat together and journey home to the burning city of Babylon again, only in this version we get a sneak peek of the shadowy figure who looks to be behind this savage attack, but have to put up with this visual monstrosity sandwiched in amongst it, so it evens out. After saying all that out loud, I've come to realise that there's so much more going on in this adventure compared to the Sands of Time. Sure, we still have a steady number of hours just journeying around this seemingly massive island, but the plot of Warrior Within runs deep throughout the entire campaign, whereas in the last game you had several hours of uninterrupted journey time as the Prince and Farah got to know each other while simultaneously working together to reach the Tower of Dawn. Here, there's nothing like that. The prince feels completely isolated in this monstrous fortress and stays focused solely on his mission, which is to undo his unbearable fate by killing a seemingly innocent person. It's all really dark stuff and the game usually gets criticised for it, but honestly, I love the story. Cutscenes are plentiful and you're constantly getting new objectives, so it never feels like you're chasing after the one goal for hours on end. It's clear that the developers didn't have this plot in mind when creating the previous game, but I think it was a right ballsy move to go down this path. The pacing of the game feels a tad more lopsided than before, but the plot threads hold themselves together considerably stronger as there's many intriguing things going on at once. There's layer upon layer of secrecy riddled throughout the story, and the stakes feel far higher than they ever did in the Sands of Time, thanks mainly to the Dahaka. It's brilliant. Now, it's this particular area of the game where it usually gets the most criticism thrown at it, and I've never quite understood all the hate. I think this is a fantastic looking game for 2004. It looks just as great, if not better, than the previous entry, and steps up texture and environmental details noticeably. It's easy to say that it looks visually ugly solely because it lacks the charm of Sands of Time, but the technical aspects are mostly superior. What those people really mean is that the game doesn't look the way they want it to. I often find that people who really hate this game are all massive fans of the Sands of Time, and probably didn't give Warrior Within much of a chance because it strayed too far from what they loved about the Prince's first adventure, and I can understand that. This used to actually be my least favourite game of the trilogy. I wasn't actually a fan of the grisly visuals, constant heavy metal riffs and greatly increased difficulty spike, but it was a game that I kept returning to for whatever reason. The more times I played through the story, the more I get used to the overwhelmingly dark aesthetic, the less linear structure of the environments and the seemingly endless lust for bloodshed, and now, quite frankly, I wouldn't change a single thing about the design. One element I can't dispute though is the fact that Warrior Within doesn't have quite as many diverse, eye-catching environments as its predecessor. The Arabian fantasy side of things is all but gone, and we're left with near constant dark, brooding environments spread all over the island of time. Although the title of the game is still Prince of Persia, there's no real indication that this adventure takes place anywhere near a prince's kingdom. The island of time's look is a right royal hodgepodge of all sorts of different architectures. The outside of the fortress and certain specific areas look Eastern European in design, yet there are strange Egyptian looking hieroglyphics and crypts, hanging gardens reminiscent of Babylon, elaborate mechanical clockwork mechanisms and medieval looking torture chambers. There's very little that reminds us of our last adventure with the prince. It's a totally different world that we inhabit this time round, but it genuinely suits the mood of the story perfectly. The prince is a shadow of the pompous nobleman we encountered in the Sands of Time. Remember, he's been hunted by an unstoppable force for the best part of 7 years due to his actions. It seems only fitting that he must travel through such a desolate, ruined wasteland in order to undo his nightmare. The vistas do manage to visually separate themselves from one another though, largely thanks to the fact that we travel through most areas of the island in 2 different time zones. This primarily benefits the story, but it also keeps things nice and fresh for the player as well. In the present, all the surroundings lay shattered to pieces and consumed by Mother Nature. There's hardly a part of the fortress hanging together, and a depressing grey filter over everything. When we travel back to the past, however, we get to see what the island looked like years ago before nature took over. The fortress is in one piece. There's a sombre yet alluring atmosphere encompassing everything and a golden brown filter instead of grey. Most areas we visit on the island are comparable through both time zones, and it adds some warranted variety to the levels and an additional level of engagement as we get to see what the power of time has done to these once majestic structures. Like the Sands of Time, one of my very favourite elements of the game is the music, and I don't necessarily mean the heavy rock riffs that blast out at every chance possible. What I'm mainly talking about are the ambient tracks that loop over specific areas. There are far more of them this time round, and they are invaluable when it comes to laying on the eerie atmosphere that surrounds the prince. Some of the best examples are the creepy track that plays after you defeat Shadi on the sacrificial altar, the strange rhythm that starts when you enter the garden tower, and my personal favourite, the truly mysterious vocal track that starts when you're in the foundry. That one creeps me out even to this day when I'm playing that section late at night, which means it works exceedingly well at heightening the harrowing mood of desolation. On the other end we have the rock riffs which blare whenever you get stuck into some combat or have to run for your life as the Dahaka ominously hunts you down. Some of these work better than others. I do find the Godsmack instrumentals to be a bit of a grind after a while, even though they can enhance the chase segments. It just becomes a bit gratuitous when even the end credits are scrolling to the sound of one of their songs. All a bit too much for me. Some of the actual combat music created for the game though is outstanding and helps ramp up the intensity when you're taking down never-ending hordes of monsters. The track that blares in the prison is especially effective and without doubt my favourite song from the game. Well, it's my favourite barring the main menu music because that's timeless. Things are pretty much faultless when it comes to Warrior Within's in-game animations. Aside from some new insane looking combos during fights, the prince keeps almost the exact same moveset that he had from the previous game, and the acrobatic manoeuvres look even more impressive than before. Animation wise, this is very familiar territory, as the prince runs and vaults identically to Sands of Time, but his overall appearance and attitude have sure been given a murky makeover. The prince now looks like a battle-hardened warrior with longer jet black hair, spouting disparaging remarks as he annihilates hordes of enemies.
Why do you bother?
It's a jarring change no doubt, but makes sense when you stop to consider the years of constant turmoil he's implied to have gone through. His change of demeanour is driven home when he curses at a couple of enemies who stand in the way of his mission.
You bitch! Die, you bastard!
Thankfully these almost overwhelmingly aesthetic changes don't make their way into the gameplay side of things. I won't go over the core gameplay mechanics that are practically identical to the Sands of Time. Instead I'll go through combat, action platforming and puzzle solving to see what's new in this entry and whether everything works or not. Let's face it, the only element of Sands of Time that really held it back was the overly repetitive combat system. It worked well enough for that game, but it was clearly an area that the developers would have to flesh out for Warrior Within, and holy shit did they flesh it out. Quite honestly, the combat went from being my least favourite gameplay element to my favourite this time round. With this game, Ubisoft introduced a free-form fighting system and advertised it heavily in pre-release trailers, so I'm guessing they knew they were onto a winner here. Everything about this new system feels insanely better than the jump, swipe, finish off routine we had to go through with every single sand creature before. Here, you can string together limitless amounts of crazy combos, dual wield weapons, throw projectiles, grapple and throw enemies, decapitate them, choke them out, shred them in half. It's glorious. It feels like a kind of precursor to the Batman free flow fighting system, but with more acrobatics and gore. Unlike the last game where you had to find an enemy's weakness and try to repeatedly exploit it in each fight, here you rock up to a group of monsters and can choose to take them down any way you feel like. Even walls and poles can be used as interactive objects to give the prince a couple extra moves in times of need. I can't actually think of a single complaint with the combat mechanics on offer, but the enemies you face off against aren't quite as impressive as what you can do to them. There are a fair amount of foes that you come across on the island, but they don't seem half as imposing as the hulking sand zombies we came across in Azad. These creatures look much more humanoid in appearance, being about the same height as the prince and moving at a much faster speed than anything we've seen in the last game. We still have the same formula for the enemy encounters though, taking on simple raiders through the earlier levels, moving on to the trickier seekers in the mid levels, and eventually coming up against the challenging executioners and assassins near the end. This does play out well as it helps you get used to the new combat system as you take down easier enemies on the island first, because once you come up against the latter hordes, you're going to need just about every combo you can remember in order to take them down without suffering massively. There are also a couple of mini bosses we come across who predominantly reside in the garden and mechanical towers. These come in the form of a crowmaster who dissipates after a few strikes and rematerialises in another podium, and a few giant golems that require you to vault on their back in order to chip away at their noggin armour and cleave right through their skulls. They're all good, and aside from them, the game does try and shake things up a bit in the form of highly aggressive dog, wolf, sand creature things. I'm not exactly sure what these four-legged fiends are meant to be, but they come in two forms anyway. There are the common spike beasts, which act erratically and explode into a ball of fire when they reach their end, and scavengers, which only appear in the last third of the game. These fuckers seem far more powerful than their spiky brethren, and leap huge distances to tear the prince apart. Both of these enemy types are pests of hell, but they're still a welcomed addition compared to those blasted birds and bats from before, as at least these beasts can be taken out on the ground. Since the prince has Farah's Amulet of Time instead of the dagger for this adventure, there's no requirement for us to suck the life out of all these enemies for a finisher move. The human foes all show damage now and eventually turn a sandy colour when they're just a few hits away from death. This is a great addition. It lets you know just how close you are to taking down each monster, meaning you can neatly set off an elaborate combo to take 3 or 4 of them out at once. Also, the developers must have realised that sometimes the fights can get a little too much, and so helpfully laid out nearby traps that you can use to kill off a few enemies at a time. The last thing I want to mention about the combat are the new sand powers that you can use to your advantage. You can't exactly freeze a whole group of creatures at once anymore, but you can use Ravages of Time to move through time at a blinding speed and take down several enemies simultaneously. We can also slow down time properly now, meaning that the prince is unaffected and can perform more effective attacks on stagnant enemies. Lastly, we come to the ground attacks, which are 360-degree blasts that knock a multitude of enemies away from the prince. These come in 3 different versions, all varying in strength, but as always, the stronger the melee attack, the more sand tanks it will drain. Aside from the powers, you also gain upgraded swords as the game progresses, meaning that enemies should theoretically start to pose less threat as the weapon you wield is far more powerful in the second half of the game. It doesn't exactly play out like this though, as some of the later fights are undeniably a pain in the arse. Onto the platforming now, and everything feels like business as usual here. I think this was simply a case of if it's not broke, don't fix it, and in all honesty, that works out just perfectly. The prince can still perform his large array of acrobatic stunts to traverse the environment wonderfully. Only a few new moves have been added, such as running along vertical ropes, slicing down the island's tapestries, and running up walls to pull mechanisms of sort, and they're all seamlessly incorporated into his already vast moveset and never come across as shoehorned additions. The power to rewind time is still the biggest hook of the game, and you'll get far more use of this handy power in this adventure, I can assure you. A great new inclusion this time round is the Eye of the Storm, which I just briefly spoke about in relation to the combat. This lets you travel around for 10 seconds at normal speed, while everything around you is put into slow motion. It makes far more sense than its wonky inclusion in the Sands of Time, as this time the power becomes essential to avoid traps, fight enemies and get through certain doors that would be an impossibility in normal time. Again, the amulet is fueled by the Sands of Time, but this time there's no sand clouds hidden in the island. Instead, sand is stored in breakable objects and the creatures you fight again. Let's get it right, this is without doubt the most difficult game in the trilogy. Gone are the pre-rendered cutscenes which help you foresee the path you should be taking. Only sometimes will the camera scan around the place as you enter a new room, and even then, that's toned down dramatically, only showing you where you need to go, but not leaking any clues as to how to find your way there. I didn't appreciate the added difficulty when I was younger, but playing it through now, I much prefer this bare bones approach to the platforming. If you're not careful, it's extremely simple to get lost or not understand how to pass through a certain area, but it ends up feeling more rewarding when you discover the path all by yourself and gradually gain knowledge of how every level is laid out. Even the traps this time round seem like they've been cranked up to 11. There's hardly a nook or cranny you explore that doesn't have some piece of gruesome machinery set out to massacre the prince. Many traps return from the last game, but we do have some new troublesome devices that demand much more patience from the player. We now have horizontal spiky poles, delayed blade spike mechanisms and giant stone pillar things that can squash you to a pulp if you're not careful. It's not just the traps themselves that are harder, but the layouts become more complex in the later levels, meaning you're going to have to slow down time a bunch to forge your path through them. It's worth mentioning that this game will take you a good 2 to 3 hours longer to complete in the Sands of Time. There's a lot of gameplay in here and a fair amount of different areas in the map to explore, but thankfully things never get boring thanks to the introduction of the Sand Wraith about 3/4 of the way through the story. When you do eventually don the mask of the Wraith, you go through a traumatising physical transformation which welds the mask to the prince's face and distorts him into a spectral doppelganger, allowing him to occupy 2 spaces in the one timeline. We play as a Wraith until the prince's other self perishes, and it really spices things up in the back half of the game. Aside from the cool new look, we also get some key changes to the gameplay as your Sands of Time regenerate, where your life slowly fades away. This subtle difference actually contributes a great deal to the remaining couple hours of gameplay, as the difficulty level cranks up tremendously in terms of platforming, allowing you to take advantage of the countless sand tanks as you fail parts again and again. And it's balanced out nicely by the fact that your constantly depleting life bar will have you attentively dodging every single trap and enemy attacks to make sure that you take as little extra damage as possible. The Sand Wraith section might actually be my favourite of the game, the more I come to think on it. It does keep things so fresh all throughout the final stretch of the story, and of course we've seen the Sand Wraith creature earlier but thought of it as an adversary instead of an ally. It's all compelling stuff when we play as a Wraith and interact with the prince's other self multiple times. Last but certainly not least are the Dahaka set pieces spread throughout the game. The Dahaka itself is an outstanding creation and the main antagonist of the game, yet the developers knew that showing him too often would ruin the scare factor it possesses. The Dahaka catches up with the prince throughout his journey, which results in a dozen or so incredibly tense chase sequences where we need to outrun this force of nature by platforming the shit out of the environment. We discover quite early on that the Dahaka's sole weakness is what gives our prince strength: water, and so every chase comprises of us running for our lives until we reach a place of safety behind water where the beast cannot pass. They're legit thrilling sequences that get much better each time they show up and act as an immediate step to raise your pulse and platform like your life depends on it. Okay, so I've probably spoken far too much about the platforming, so I'm quite glad that there's actually hardly any puzzles to speak of in Warrior Within. Again, like Sands of Time, there's puzzle solving elements interlaced all through the game in the form of pulling levers and figuring out how to traverse tricky sections in the environment, but these are to be expected as they merge in so smoothly with the other gameplay elements. The only outright puzzle to speak of are the magma pipes that you must line up in order to melt down a platform for you. I've always found this puzzle to be a bit of a pain in the arse. I'm sure there's a simple order to do it so that you're only turning a few pipes and that's it by with, but I always end up messing around in this foundry for 10 minutes trying to figure it out. Again, it's far from a difficult puzzle and even my lousy style of trial and error gets it out of the way quite promptly, but it's just so strange that it's the only puzzle room in the game and sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the fortress's environment. I used to always forget that this was even in the game, to be honest. Right, so I've basically done nothing but praise Warrior Within for the best part of the last half hour, so it's only right to point out some of the flaws that it's got going against it now. To start, no matter how much I love the setting of the Island of Time, and let's get it right, I do think it's superb. Even I have to concede that the backtracking present throughout just about all of the game can become almost unbearable at times. Just to be clear, I'm a big fan of the far less linear open world style of the map that we're going for here, and the environments for the most part are spectacular to roam around for the first couple of times. There's a few minor areas such as the beach at the beginning, or the cliffside, the aforementioned foundry room and the mystic caves near the end that all feel particularly special within the world, and the reason for this is simply that we only visit these areas once and so they never get a chance to become stale. Places like the mechanical tower and the creepy prison are without doubt some of the greatest levels in the game, with the coolest architecture and platforming resources, but the truth is that we've passed through them so many times in the back half of the game that we start to question whether we're even going the right way half the time. I wouldn't like even estimate how many times I've completed Warrior Within, but even in my last playthrough there was a brief moment that had me questioning myself as I took the same path back from the clockwork room for the third time. I was sure I took a wrong turn somewhere down the line. Just remember actually my pal Christopher, who's no stranger to this game, took a wrong turn once while looking for a life upgrade I think, and ended up being stuck in the wrong room with no exit in sight. There was no way back. It's easily done, and I imagine on a first playthrough it could make or break the experience for the player. And that's about it. That's about all the negatives I really have for the level design, in truth. The course you're meant to take can be blurry at times, but the actual levels you pass through are artistically astonishing and a real joy to behold. As I mentioned earlier, a good chunk of the environments are immensely dark and grimy, but they're still remarkably detailed in design, more so than in the Sands of Time actually. The moderately open world is great at bringing a sense of cohesiveness to all the different places scattered throughout the island, as they all link together through massive entrances in the central hall, or alternatively secret passages that you discover more and more towards the end of the tale. Revisiting the same old places can be a chore, but thankfully it's never an identical experience, as a cutscene will trigger or a Dahaka pursuit will start up just as you ponder how many times you've crawled along this ledge. If you're going the right way, you'll find out soon enough, and you'll only be venturing through a repeated environment for a short length of time before you're thrust into an all new place tucked away within the depths of the fortress. There are genuinely no single levels that I can think of off the top of my head that I dislike in Warrior Within. From start to finish, the locales that you advance through are insanely absorbing. The oppressive atmosphere that's a failing to some works wonders in showing just how isolated the prince is in his journey, roaming this creepy ravaged fortress through 2 time zones and facing all manner of sand infested monsters. There's no denying that it's a lonely journey this time round, with very little character development possible, as every character the prince meets ends up having to die from his blade. I'll quickly go over a couple of my favourite areas in the game that routinely stand out to me as being the high points of the adventure. The Garden Tower is the one true remainder of life in the island, and one of the most visually satisfying areas that you parkour through, no doubt. In the present, it's an overgrown wilderness where vines and tree stumps can be utilised by the prince as makeshift podiums as he makes his way through the lush labyrinth. Back in the past though, the garden looked the part, with glistening blooms of light bursting through the trees and enchanting vegetation surrounding all the rooms. It's a brief glimpse of what this now haunting palace used to look like, and a warranted change of vista compared to the usual industrial hell we're used to. My absolute favourite level in the game though are the mystic caves that you come across near the end while being chased by the Dahaka. These ghostly caverns are covered with a thick layer of fog which cause you to have real difficulty manoeuvring through. It's an otherworldly realm that seems oddly detached from the rest of the fortress, as it's like nothing else we come across in our journey. Its placement in the journey also helps out greatly, as it comes after a huge segment of backtracking. It's a breath of fresh air when an all new striking area like this appears out of nowhere. Another great thing about the Island of Time is how mysterious the whole place feels. It's like a sanctuary to all these monsters who dwell within. It possesses an overwhelmingly eerie atmosphere from the first second you step foot there. The secrets to be discovered in this game are plentiful compared to the last, as there's artwork chests, secondary weapons and life upgrades all hidden deep in the island, and I mean hidden. Some of these collectibles are easy to come by on your linear path, but others are in discreet areas that you would never think of venturing to. A few are hidden behind cracked walls that you cannot get through the first time you pass the area, and so must backtrack there after acquiring the Scorpion Sword, because it can break through walls. There's one life upgrade in particular though that is hidden deep within an early section of the game that you would never even dream of returning to had you not watched a helpful video on YouTube. It's batshit crazy how far out of the way it's concealed, but you have to admit it all feels worthwhile when you finally reach it and get your reward in the form of the water sword. And on that note, let's round things off by going over the bosses. If you remember, I ripped apart the boss fights last time round, and rightly so. They were utter shite in the Sands of Time, but thankfully, yet again, Warrior Within mends just about all the problems and churns out 4 pretty damn satisfying boss fights. Well, I say 4, there's actually 5 if you count the alternative ending with the Dahaka, which conveniently can only be accessed if you find all the health upgrades and possess the water sword. The boss battles aren't exactly stellar here, as they almost entirely consist of combat mechanics yet again, but they're varying and challenging enough to hold their own in a game packed with brilliance. They're more typical of what you would expect, as a giant health bar appears at the bottom of the screen and you try every trick in the book to take out each opposing enemy. The first 2 battles against Shadi and the Empress are straightforward enough, and then there's a random battle with a giant sand griffin that comes right out of left field. No idea if this thing was a guardian of the Empress or just a transformed creature that dwells in the island, but it's a terrific change of pace. Your final battle has you taken off against either a far stronger version of the Empress or the almighty Dahaka itself. I definitely prefer the latter, as it's a much tougher challenge but also feels merited, facing off against this seemingly invincible beast that's been hunting you for years and taking it down with a legendary sword. It just sounds right. It's just a pity that in this ending you end up shacked up with Kylina once all was said and done. A lot of shite. I would have preferred it if the Dahaka erased her from the timeline before your showdown, as it would have added even more extra weight to the confrontation, but hey ho, just nitpicking now. Okay, so yeah, if you can't tell, I truly love Warrior Within. In my last review, I called Sands of Time damn near a masterpiece, and well, I would take it one step further this time and say that Warrior Within is one. The overly dark and edgy direction they took things has never bothered me in the slightest, and only stands to elevate the experience for me. Even the different choice of voice actors seems to suit the pitch black tone of the game just perfectly.
When a man is faced with his own death, he finds the impossible less of a barrier.
To me, it's an even richer adventure than its predecessor, with a largely interconnected world to explore, massively improved combat, more hidden secrets and a noticeably longer story. Even the graphics on offer here are again outstanding for 2004, and the gameplay mechanics hold up just about flawlessly in every single aspect. The charm and atmosphere may be replaced with one of dread and despair, but the game is no less enjoyable to play through, quite the contrary. The level design is still as razor sharp as ever, and there's more to sink your teeth into plot wise this time round. I can completely understand why some people were initially put off by the attitude of this game, but I would wholeheartedly still recommend this game to anybody now, even if it is 16 years old and only available on outdated systems. Backtracking aside, I would say that this is an incredibly ballsy follow-up to the much adored Sands of Time, and one of my personal favourite games of all time. Just need to wait and see if the trilogy gets closed out with the same intense quality after Warrior Within received such an initial backlash. Join me next time as I take on the final piece in the puzzle, the Two Thrones.
Your journey will not end well. You cannot change your fate. No man can.
Thanks very much for watching, especially if you sat through this whole entire video. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed what you've seen, and subscribe to the channel for more content coming up. Thanks a lot.